¿Qué tal? Bienvenidos a otra sesión del segundo encuentro internacional de la Red Ecología Acústica México, que está teniendo lugar estas jornadas del 9 al 12 de diciembre de 2020. Usted puede encontrar información sobre todo lo que estamos transmitiendo en www.rea-mx.org, y como ya los que nos han estado acompañando y los que estén a partir del día de hoy y en las subsecuentes sesiones acompañándonos, deben de saber que hay varias líneas de investigación en la REA-México, entre ellas las de urbanismo, arquitectura, ruido, salud, cartografías, paisaje sonoro urbano, que van a tener lugar muchas de ellas el día de hoy, bioacústica y ecoacústica, que tuvimos oportunidad de escuchar algunas de estas especializaciones e investigaciones el día de ayer. También hay sobre arqueoacústica y trabajos con grupos indígenas, antropología, investigación sociológica, etnomusicología. Tenemos una sección muy robusta de sonido y arte, y también hay cuestiones que tienen que ver con patrimonio, con archivos, preservación digital, entre muchas otras cosas. El día de hoy, dentro de lo que serían prácticas de escucha, transdisciplina y elementos que tienen que ver con sonido y arte a nivel de investigación, tenemos la presencia de un invitado especial. Se trata de Frank Ekeberg. Él va a hablar acerca de la espacialidad y temporalidad en el arte sónico ambiental, Spatiality and Time Scaling in Environmental Sonic Art. Y le doy la bienvenida. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. You're welcome. Voy a presentar a Frank a través de su hoja de vida, de su bio, pero él está adscrito al Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History en Estados Unidos y tiene su base en Noruega, en la ciudad de Trondheim. Y entonces él, como les comentaba hace un momento, nos va a hablar de espacialidad y temporalidad en el arte sónico ambiental y va a presentar algunos de sus proyectos. Voy a hacer la introducción de su trabajo, su perfil en español y posteriormente en inglés. Esta, como algunas otras de nuestras charlas, tendrá lugar su conferencia especializada en inglés y podremos hacer las preguntas que ustedes tengan también en inglés y en español. Recuerden también que en la página de YouTube, donde estamos transmitiendo en este momento, donde seguramente es donde usted nos está viendo, puede dejar sus comentarios, sugerencias o preguntas y nosotros las podemos integrar a nuestra emisión. Entonces, empezaré por decir que Frank Ekeberg es un artista transdisciplinar, es un compositor y un investigador que trabaja en la intersección de arte, ciencia y tecnología. Su trabajo explora también cuestiones de ecología, tiempo, espacialidad y transformación, y tiene especialmente un enfoque en lo que son los espacios naturales, los ecosistemas y este espacio que va entre lo humano y lo no humano, estos mundos que se tocan. También su investigación está enfocada acerca de colaboraciones que van más allá del ámbito del arte. Ekeberg ha compuesto y ha diseñado sonido para performance, para conciertos, para danza, cine, teatro, radio, teatros y también instalaciones intermedias. Su trabajo se ha presentado en distintos festivales, exposiciones, conciertos y conferencias y congresos alrededor del mundo. En 2017 fue galardonado con el Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship y actualmente, como mencionamos en un principio, él es Research Associate en el Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History en Washington, en Estados Unidos. Pasa la mayor parte de su tiempo entre Trondheim, en Noruega, y Frank Ekeberg también se graduó como músico en la Universidad Noruega de Ciencia y Tecnología. También realizó una maestría en Mills College en Auckland, una maestría en música electrónica. donde estudió composición con Pauline Oliveros y con Alvin Curran. Es doctor en música electroacústica, composición en música electroacústica por la City University London en Inglaterra, y trabajó especialmente con Dennis Smalley y Simon Emerson. Ahora voy a presentarlo en inglés. I'm going to now introduce you in English, Frank, and then we'll go ahead with your conference. Frank Ekeberg is a transdisciplinary artist, music composer, and researcher working in the intersection of art, science, and technology. His work explores issues of ecology, time, spatiality, and transformation, with a particular focus on nature spaces, ecosystems, and the interplay between human and non-human worlds. His research-based approach often involves collaboration within as well beyond the art field. Ekeberg has composed and designed sound for concert performance, dance, film, theater, radio plays, and intermedia installations, and his work is widely presented in festivals, exhibitions, concerts, and conferences around the world. He was awarded the 2017 Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship and is currently research associate at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. He spends most of his time living and working in Trondheim, Norway. Frank Ekeberg received an undergraduate degree in music from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology before he went on to pursue a master's degree in electronic music at Mills College in Oakland, California, where he studied composition with Pauline Oliveros and Alvin Curran, and a PhD in electroacoustic music composition at City University London, UK, with Dennis Smalley and Simon Emerson. Vamos entonces a escuchar la conferencia especializada de Frank Ekeberg, que en este caso, repito el título, se trata de espacialidad y temporalidad en el arte sónico-ambiental, donde él va a tratar de clarificar un poco lo que considera que es la espacialidad en relación con el arte sónico, y también va a hablar acerca del time scaling, esta especie de dispositivo estructural que permite tener conocimiento de largos periodos de tiempo en espacios muy comprimidos, y en especial a través de instalaciones artísticas. Y también nos va a presentar algunos ejemplos de trabajos concretos. Frank, thank you for being here with us again. El que quiera hacer un comentario, una pregunta, que quiera participar de alguna manera en este diálogo y conferencia, lo invitamos a dejar sus comentarios en la página YouTube. Whoever wants to propose some questions or interfere in some way in this dialogue, please leave your comments on the YouTube chat window. Adelante, Frank. Bienvenido.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luz, for the kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be invited to take part in this very exciting conference. I will start my talk by first unpacking the title and try to explain what I mean by spatiality and time scaling, both as structural devices and in particular with regards to the sonic arts. And I will get into some of my installation works later on and explain then how I use these principles in these works. So as my bio indicates, my background is in the acousmatic tradition of electroacoustic music, where the work is typically composed onto a fixed medium for listening solely over loudspeakers, and where space has been a focus of practice and thought since the very beginning of the genre, and integral to composition and presentation, and an essential element of the compositional structure. So spatial considerations in the composition process, meaning the choice and arrangement of sound material in terms of spatial characteristics and associations, are fundamental to the creation of acousmatic works. And as a starting point, I take the notion that space is an essential element of human experience. There is a spatial context to any listening. We move about in relation to objects and other people, and we hear sounds in a multidimensional sound field. Our interpretation of spatial relations is largely shaped by cultural knowledge and experience of spatial communication in everyday life, such as patterns of interpersonal communication, experience of rural and urban life, the architectural environment in which we live, as well as how space is represented in language. And this knowledge informs our encounters with each other and with our surroundings, both visually and orally. Space communicates and establishes types of relationships between participants in situations of interpersonal interaction and shapes the individual's relationship with the surrounding natural and cultural environments. And what is often most pronounced when listening to electroacoustic music in performance is the emphasis on placement and movement of sound within the listening space. It's the drama that spatialization adds to the composed work. And working with spatial elements with an awareness of what they might evoke in the listener is important. Because there are important instinctive and associative differences in the experience of sounds localized in front, above, or behind the listener, or of sounds that are nearby or far away, or isolated sounds, or entire immersive sound fields. So movement adds another aspect by incorporating changes in distance and direction, as well as elements of speed, range, acceleration, deceleration, and changes in perspective. So the space that we hear and perceive in everyday life is quite complex. It's a combination of many factors: spatial elements of the individual sound and any association it carries, spatial characteristics of the room that the sound excites, the spatial relationship between you, the listener, and the sound. That is, where is it coming from? Is it stationary? If you recognize the source, what image does it trigger? Is it likely to change position? Is it going towards you, away from you? What does it tell you about the space you are in, the size of it and its extent? Is it empty or is it filled? And all these factors contribute to how we experience the sound and how we experience our relationship to the space that these sounds define. So it is these multiple layers of meaning that I'm interested in with regards to spatiality. So each individual sound has inherent spatial properties. It can be dense, it can be hollow, small, thin, big, and so on. In this sense, you can think of the sound as space. And when you hear it, it has a location relative to your listening position. It can be stationary, it can be moving, it can be localized, it can be dispersed over a larger area. And then you hear it as a sound in space. When you combine sounds that each contribute such properties, being distance or close, moving between locations in the listening space, sounds that together define a virtual or composed space, you get the sound of space. So these are the three levels that I believe define the space that we're actually listening in and listening to. So using sound sources that contain environmental cues that point to a valid spatial setting can be a very powerful device in sonic arts, as it is tied to a recognizable source that carries with it associations with spaces known from real-life experience. Such associations arise in relation to physical spatial settings and also in relation to other properties that are related to such settings, like social or psychological or historical references, by incorporating cues to specific events, situations, persons, or activities associated with these settings. And here the sound material is organized into a context in which spatial relationships are established and virtual spaces are set up. And multiple spaces can be juxtaposed. So in the case of acousmatic music, the virtual space or spaces of the composition are inevitably juxtaposed with the real space in which the listener is situated. But you can also have several virtual spaces combined or working against each other or with each other in kind of a dialogue, in kind of a counterpoint, and so on. So even the space in a larger sense can have a higher level structural function in that way. And the composed space itself is a temporal space in which spatial configurations connect and evolve in a structural manner as the work progresses. That is, the spaces themselves can undergo transformations, and this happens over time. And this underlines that time and space are not separable. Every sonic event, any event that helps define the sonic space, has a duration, and thus it evolves through time. And that is real time, clock time, or absolute time, that we want to term it, which is linear and always forward pointing. As with the juxtaposition of spaces, there can be several temporalities running in parallel. So an important device in time-based art is the notion of narrative space, or story, or narrative time, or story time, which does not have to be chronological, does not have to follow absolute time. In film, this is the time that is covered by the story rather than the actual duration of telling the story. And this can be used similarly in sonic arts, including sonic arts that's based on field recordings from nature and culture. And narrative time is intertwined with memory and anticipation, which are also important compositional devices in music and sonic art. So the experience of the moment, the present in the work, is colored by what we heard in the past and by what we anticipate will come in the future. So a narrative is a representation, and we often create mental images of the places that narratives describe. In a sense, then, sonic associations become a form of mapping as the representations of space unfold over time. And the connection between cartography and narration is well established over a long time of human history. So I will share my screen now and move on to talking about specific works. There we go. And this work was created in collaboration with Krista Caballero, visual artist now based in New York. We started working on Birding the Future in 2013. It is an interdisciplinary artwork that explores current extinction rates by focusing on the warning abilities of birds as bioindicators of environmental change. And the installation invites visitors to listen to endangered and extinct bird calls and to view visionary avian landscapes through stereograph, sculpture, and video, in addition to sound of several kinds. This ongoing project explores how declining bird populations signal profound changes over our entire planet. Birds are a bridge species in that they offer a way to collaborate across environmental issues that are collectively shared, yet separately valued, and enter conversations that would not be possible otherwise. And one reason for that is we find birds in pretty much any ecosystem on the planet, and every culture has some form of relationship with birds, whether through myth and folk tales, or ceremony and religion and so on. So birds provide a unique window into the entanglements of our time. And unrestricted by human-imposed borders, approximately 5 billion birds migrate every year, and thereby linking cultures, countries, and ecologies, and revealing issues collectively shared. So birds have been seen as message bearers, able to communicate the future, announce changes in weather, and warn of coming disaster. And now it's used in environmental monitoring to monitor environmental health. And because when something happens to the bird population, that means there is a problem somewhere else in the habitats or in the ecosystem. And currently, with the current projections, almost a third of all bird species will have disappeared by the end of this century. And in Birding the Future, we asked 3 questions in particular in response to this. And what does it mean that we can only see and hear extinct species through technology? And what might happen as the messages of birds are increasingly being silenced? And the last is, how might we bridge knowledge systems using traditional and emerging technologies to develop a cross-cultural praxis for ecological futures rooted in kinship with the world? So there are 7 region-specific versions of the project so far. The first one was Queensland, Australia, 2013. And then Arabian Peninsula and Norway, Mid-Atlantic USA, Rhine-Main, Germany. Now we are working on the Sky Islands, Arizona series. And there's also a series focused on laboratory birds. Of the references to time in this project, you see the stereoscope there, which was a very popular way of viewing three-dimensional images in the 19th century. And we used that for the stereographs, which is a 3D image, composite image, related to the topic of the specific series. So on the back of these cards, there is scientific data. And this one is the northern bald ibis, and an example of how specific scientific data is put on one of the cards. But we also have cards with poetry, statistics, and anything related to the particular region where the work is presented. Let's see if I can click beyond. There we go. So Birding the Future exists in several different versions, and it started out as an outdoor version the first time. This is from 2016 in Washington, D.C., where I developed these solar-powered loudspeaker boxes that you see there in the image, and spread these out on the installation area, which is the area behind this kind of trailhead box, where the cards are placed there on the image. And doing it outdoors, it's important to pair the sound or balance the sound with the local ecosystem or the local birds to, in a way, expand the space of the installation itself, and then include the local birds also as sound material in the piece. So the sound material that is included in the piece is a number of recordings of already extinct birds. And these act as a memory of the past, and also kind of a warning of what might happen if you lose more birds. We can only reproduce them through technology. In addition, there is the sound of endangered birds of the particular region where we install the work. And of the endangered birds, which I investigate, I look into research that the red list, the national red list, the international red list, and other lists of endangered and threatened species. And I take one long and one short sound of each of these endangered birds and create Morse code messages. And the messages are based on phrases where birds speak to humans in stories and folk tales and so on, specifically to that region. And these endangered birds die out over a period of time. And what I look at then is the projected extinction rate for the end of the century, scale that down to one day of the exhibit, so that in Washington, D.C., I think it was projected that 38% of the birds would die out by the end of the century. So during a day of the exhibit, 38% of the bird species would disappear. So the longer you stay, the fewer birds you hear, basically. And that's one way I work with time scaling in this particular one. We also have indoor versions of it, like the one in this arts in Rockville, with our loudspeakers on ceiling level, where we have non-vocalizations, which means wings, the sound of birds flying throughout the entire space in an immersive fashion. And in the sculpture, there are also sound elements, tactile transducers that make the wood vibrate, and in effect, with a number of transducers I used in this piece, it was like making the sculpture sing, and that's where the extinct birds were, and also most of the endangered birds were also part of the sculptural sound. And the pictures on the left at the bottom is from Frankfurt, Germany. You see the stereoscopes being handled. It's an interactive piece. And the other picture shows a video of the lab series, the laboratory series. which is kind of a little different. I'm not going to get into that part of it, but it focuses on birds as in laboratories and how we use those. So the next piece where I also work on use time scaling is called No Man's Land in English. And this is a constantly changing speculative soundscape that highlights issues of deforestation, resource extraction, habitat loss, species extinction, and natural versus artificial life. And the sound material in this installation is based on field recordings made in old growth forest in Norway that has provided stability for many hundred years and contributed to this identity of closeness to nature. And material is processed to reflect a contemporary reality of fragmentation and rapid change. So it goes through transformations over time as the work progresses. Only scattered remains are left of the rainforest today, and it's now on the red list of endangered habitat types. So 80% of the coastal rainforest has been lost in the past 100 years and is predicted to disappear completely within the next 5 decades. So the loss of species and habitat is reflected in installation by 80% of the sounds of birds and insects gradually disappearing as the day of the exhibition progresses. So similar as Birding the Future, but on a bigger, on a wider species scale. And when this decline reaches a tipping point, artificial drone-like sounds start to appear and replace the sounds of the natural pollinators. So the sound material is for the most part recorded in coastal rainforest areas in Norway using conventional as well as unconventional microphone techniques, some of which are there. And some sounds are easily recognizable, like water dripping and rustling of leaves in the wind, while others are recordings of sounds that are normally not heard, like insects inside logs and on the surface of water, as well as the sound inside trees moving in the wind. So the sounds are recorded and further edited so that each component of the forest soundscape becomes a sound file that can be independently controlled and manipulated. So if I take this back, it's also important that the installation of this is near big windows to the outside, also to expand the visual space of the work. And we have a natural tendency to connect what we hear with what we see. So when there are birds and trees moving in the wind and so on, that we hear in the sound piece, we easily connect that with the outside. And that is a crucial part of this work as well. So I will open for questions there if there's any time left. So that was a short walkthrough.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you so much. Well, we are just running over time because of a production problem at the beginning. I'm watching here, and Diana Peña, Amotech Music, and Garth Payne are among the public. But there's not necessarily a question per se. So before we close, I think there's something I would like you to share, maybe your website, so if in case that the public wants to know more about this project of Bird in the Future with Krista Caballero that you have been developing. Yeah. I think this image that you share with us about one day 38% of birds disappeared, in this kind of work that you do with the patches, with the emptiness of the sounds of certain species, is very clear on this concept of time scaling, how we talk about big amounts of data in a way that the public, the general public can, or you are trying to build awareness of that. I think that's very interesting. I would like to know, of course, more of that. And also the other thing I was interested in maybe talking is about how to reproduce through technology this extinct species of birds. But it goes beyond our time frame time scaling, because it's such a deep thing. It has to do with technology, with research, also with this awareness that you and with your individual projects, or with Krista Caballero, you're trying to do through all these institutions. I understand why Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History is backing up these projects that you're developing, and we would like to know more, especially this one that you're developing in Arizona. So
yeah,
I will say, well, thank you very much. If you could share maybe your website and maybe just some of your thoughts about how did you got into this specific interest of birds as a concrete and special kind of species, you know, in order to work all these themes. So I think we have a minute.
Yeah, well, the particular thing with birds is that we find them all over the world, and in every ecosystem. And in Europe, monitoring birds is a way to monitor the environment, the environmental condition as a whole. So declining bird populations is a sign of something else really bad happening, like insects disappearing, for instance, or what we have found, now that we've done this project in several places in the world, we see things that are common. Australia, Middle East, the Americas, and Europe. And habitat destruction is top of the list, basically. The birds don't have any more space. We take over, and we also kill their food because there's much less insect. The insect population is also much lower now.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a part of this I find it like really interesting. I think it will devote maybe another invitation from part of the sound ecology network. Of course, there's, as you know, because you have strong links with Mexico. There's this tradition also of following this birds, either just by visuals or visuals and sounds. Actually, in my campus in UAM Lerma, there's a big project related to that. And of course, we have some of our colleagues here working with these themes as well. So I think your conference contributes to this dialogue, and I really appreciate in that sense. Well, I think the time ran out for us this time, but I really appreciate your presence. Le estoy agradeciendo mucho a Frank Ekeberg del Smithsonian National Museum de Natural History en Estados Unidos el haber estado aquí con nosotros. Él presentó el tema muy brevemente, espacialidad y temporalidad en el arte sónico ambiental, Spatiality and Time Scaling in Environmental and Sonic Art. Y bueno, estamos compartiendo también sus links ya en el YouTube. We're sharing your links in the YouTube page, so they will stay there as part of your conference that is running. You will be running. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Y ahora vamos a escuchar, para que no se retiren, en este mismo canal, la conferencia Real to Real, el archivo sonoro como obra de arte, de Manuel Rochiturbide, que es colega de la Unidad Lerma de la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, una conferencia especializada. Les recordamos que el día sábado vamos a tener un espacio para que puedan integrarse a lo que es la Red de Ecología Acústica México, que sigan nuestras actividades. Tenemos actividades académicas hasta las 7 de la noche y posteriormente tenemos una programación de conciertos muy interesante. Todo lo pueden encontrar, el programa completo, en www.rea-corto.mx. .org. Entonces les agradezco y quizás, bueno, pues pasaremos esta información de Frank Ekeberg en algún otro momento. Muchísimas gracias a todos.